Greetings from IITM Alumni Association Societal Impact Action Group. On the occasion of the World Environment Day, we are pleased to announce the launch of our very own podcast, Green Chat. Here we discuss various causative factors that impact sustainability of future generations. Also, how we as IITM alumni and citizens can contribute to ameliorate the situation both individually and collectively as a community.
Welcome to Green Chat. Greetings to alumni of IIT Madras, alumni of other IITs, friends, citizens of the world. Namaskar, good morning. This is an initiative of the Societal Impact Action Group, SIAG for short, of IIT Madras Alumni Association. We call ourselves IIT Mars SIAG. This group was formed in September 2021. And we are you can say a small cricket team or a football team of core members. And in a way, we are all inspired by Albert Einstein's quote. And Albert Einstein had famously once said, "The world is a dangerous place, not because of those who do evil, but because of those who look on and do nothing." And it is this, in a way, that has got us together. And if you look at the world around you, you find there is a fetish for human consumption, greed, you might say, human ego. And ego is not only between humans, it's humans and the planet. And the human beings have become arrogant in the world, and that is evident when we got the coronavirus. So there has been human apathy, human indifference, and consequently, human activities have been the pivot or fulcrum around most of the ills of the world. So whatever ills we are facing today, suffering, is really because of human activities. And that's going to be the central theme of this podcast series that we're presenting to you. The IIT Mars SIAG, which was formed in September 2021, as I said, has got 4 mission groups. There are 3, the first 3 of them are the Mission Water, Mission Education, and Mission Women Empowerment. These are largely around the Indian context. India faces a lot of problems with respect to water, with respect to the empowerment of women, and education, primarily the primary education. But the 4th one, the Mission Climate Change Action, is really a global phenomenon. And we are really glad to be bringing this series, which we believe would have an impact, or they're trying to make a difference to the citizens of the world. During the past decade or so, and particularly during the last 1 year, if you look at the newspapers, then not a day passes without an article, whether it's on global warming, whether it's on the temperature rise, whether it's on floods, whether it is on greening, sustainability, etc. And the word sustainability has been bandied about time and again by the government, by politicians, by NGOs and so on. Now, often these terms are used loosely. There's a certain lack of clarity. We all assume we understand this, but yet some of them need to be amplified. And we need to connect the dots. What is the connection between some of these major terms? So there's so much to talk about. And on these subjects, the problem is, where do we begin? And what do we focus on? And no one person is really an expert on the subject of sustainability and global warming, etc. It's evolving. We are all learning. But yet, I believe, although we are learning, it's time that we all gird up our loins and said, what can we do to contribute? A citizens' movement is probably what is called for. And we as IITians who have been fortunate to receive quality education are probably well sort of endowed in time to coming to terms with this phenomenon called sustainability and global warming and make our mark or contribute. So as much as we are going to present and discuss, we look forward to you, the listeners' feedback, your comments, your suggestions, so that we can make it more participative and meaningful. And it can be really, we can trigger a citizens' movement. When we sat down to discuss what should be the name of this podcast series, being from IIT Madras, we first thought of the landmark, the Gajendra Circle. And we said, okay, then can we do something around that? So we coined this term called GC. Ultimately, we landed upon this term called Green Chat. It's akin to a fireside chat. It's serious, yet informal. It gives the big picture, yet it'll have details. So it's a blend of the big picture, the details, and it's serious as well as informative. And that's what we are attempting to do. And that's where the feedback from each one of you is extremely important for us. We launched this formally on the World Environment Day on June 5th. And here we are with our first episode. These episodes will be generally about 40 minutes. We hope to do at least 2 a month, and 2 a month. So, and who is behind this? There are 4 of us who are anchoring this podcast series. And let me introduce my co-panelists. Start with the lady, Miss Hiran Vedam. She's from the 1993 batch of IIT Madras, the BTech batch. She's a chemical engineer. She has done a lot of work on climate change technology, and she is also startups. She's involved with startups in a big way. So she's going to be a prime anchor for this whole subject of sustainability and global warming. We have Mukundan Narasimhan. He himself he does a lot of work on solar energy. He's an entrepreneur. He's actually set up solar energy plants. So he's a very apt member for this group. We have N. Suresh, who has done a lot of work in the what I would say the old economy, shipyards, ports, and doing work on logistics for the old economy in terms of shipyard and ports. And my 3 co-panels are all the younger members of this group. They are the youngsters, and I am probably the relic in this group. I belong to the 1972 batch. Mukundan is from the 1995 batch, and N. Suresh is from the 1991 batch. And I am from the 1972 batch. I'm a metallurgist from IIT Madras. I have spent my career in consulting and education. So with these few words, let us begin the program. I have set the context. And I must also say that we had done a small, shall I say, a survey to see what is the level of awareness of some of these terms with the IIT Madras alumni, the IIT Madras alumni group. And my colleagues Mukundan and Suresh will touch on this survey, what the fledgling results that we got out of this survey. So that is a good starter, we thought, for this episode. So the first question really is, I'm posing this to both Mukundan and Suresh. What is the impact of human activity on our environment? I'd use these 2 key words, that human activity has been the real problem in terms of the social ills. So what is the impact of human activity on our environment, and how extensive is the damage? Mukundan, can you start?
Good news is, the audience is educated. This is IIT Ma. They've already agreed on the climate perspective that, in our small community-based survey, the results are clear that, 100% of them agree that global warming and climate change, etc., is because of human activity. Let's start with some key rationale on why that is the case. And that's what we're going to do in this podcast series, right? So there is enough proof of environmental damage, land issues, ocean glacial melting, tropical storms, corals dying, species becoming extinct, etc. I know Suresh, you might want to jump in and add a few more things to this, that human activity-based effect on climate change.
Greetings to everybody. Taking out from there are other damages. Environmental damages are quite evident, and we can see it. The sea levels are rising. The summers are becoming hotter and longer. The intents of rainfalls are becoming much higher, and in a very short span of time, leading to floods. There are droughts happening in other parts of the world. The storms are becoming much powerful. So a survey which was done from 1880, when we started recording the warmth of the year. So the 10 warmest years was after 2005. And out of it, the 5 warmest years are after 2015. So we have enough proof to showcase the environment damage which is being done by environmental damages which is happening on a continuous basis. Unless we act on it, we will be having real problem. So this is already, the climate change is already threatening our health, our communities, our economy, and our children's future. So it's the right time we act on it on an individual basis or on a community basis and see what we can do best.
Well, thank you, Suresh and Mukundan. So what Suresh concluded was climate change is really upon us and it's threatening the life of future generations. So that brings us to the question of sustainability. Hiran, what does sustainability mean to you? Is it just unidimensional, or there are multi dimensions to this whole concept of sustainability?
Thank you, Suresh. And hello, everyone. The survey that we did for the alumni shows that more than 65% of the respondents do understand that sustainability is about the use of natural resources responsibly. We use them in a way without exhausting it, the supply of it, right? This is a fundamental definition of environmental sustainability. At a macro level, if you look at Earth, it is a closed system, except for the energy we get from the sun on a daily basis. And all the different subsystems of the soil, the fire, the energy, and air, water, all of these are interconnected. And in the large scheme of things, everything that you take out of one part of the subsystem slowly goes back into that subsystem over time. That goes with the ancient Sanskrit saying of sarvam kalo parisamapte. So there is that time constant that the nature has finely tuned to take the different parts of different things, resources that we all need from the different parts or the 5 basic elements, and return them to these elements at the end of the usage. Human activity has disrupted these time constants and the way in which they go back. Sometimes it's all of these human activity has damaged these elements so much that they cannot return to their native state. For example, if you take plastic, it takes a very long time to degrade. So to that extent, it doesn't go back to its natural state rapidly. So that's the environmental sustainability aspect, where the human activity has led to the change in the equilibrium of the different elements, both in terms of time constants and in terms of the individual compositions of the subsystems. Then there is the sustainable development, which about 18% of our survey respondents have identified as sustainability. This relates to the 17 UN SDG goals, and it combines environmental sustainability with human development. At the core is the development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the future generations. And this means that we have to balance the economic prosperity and food and water access, education, and all of that with the environment and biodiversity and all the balance within the sub-elements. When we combine this sustainable development with equity, then we have the climate justice. Okay. The third definition that we had in the survey is more about from a perspective of the most visible symptom of unsustainable living, which is climate change and warming of the planet. Nearly 18% of our respondents say that is what sustainability is all about. But in fact, it's just one symptom of the way we are abusing nature.
Thank you, Hiran. So Hiran talked about 3 dimensions of sustainability. First, in terms of upsetting the natural equilibrium, how human activities have upset the natural equilibrium. Then she talked about how and finally, she talked about how the sustainable activities, that means how future living will not be sustainable because of climate change, because of the global warming. Now, having said that, what really is climate change? We are using, as I said in the beginning, we are using a lot of words: climate change, we are using green environment, we are using sustainability. But what exactly is climate change? Is it reversible or is it irreversible? Mukundan, can you throw some light on that?
What is happening with climate change? At least, we had the similar question asked in the survey, and it's clear that 70% of the folks recognize it as long-term changes in wind patterns and temperature shifts, right? But as Hiran pointed out, it is just the symptom. The true problem is the unsustainable practices that have led to this symptom, right? And it's just a symptom. Climate change is an interim state, and the interim state itself is looks quite ominous, right? If you look at what we have done to the environment in terms of CO2 pollution, you can see from 1958 all the way till 2022, there is a steady increase in the CO2. We are at 420 ppm of CO2 concentration in the atmosphere, which is dangerous. One of the greenhouse gases that's polluting. There's methane, there's several other gases which we'll not talk about, but that's a big area. All right. And this leads to, if you look at the ice ages, you take this data, this is data from Mauna Loa before 1958, going hundreds of thousands of years, 800,000 years, because you have the ice core, which they have taken out and understood what was the CO2 level then. And there has been variations over hundreds of years, not like what we are seeing over a span of 30, 40 years, right? 20 years, for example. But if you look at in this chart where we are compared to 800,000 years, we are nowhere close to it. Even at the high point, we were at less than 300. We are at 420 ppm as we speak. So if you look at it, how this translates to from a greenhouse gas to temperature rise is global warming we're already at 1 degree C, as you saw in the earlier chart. And now, we are saying, hey, by 2027 to 2042, we will be somewhere at 1.5 C. And that is with a lot of data and uncertainty planning, how governments are going to take the steps, etc. Multiple parts of this has to be focused on net zero emissions before 2050. If we don't do that, what happens is you hit a higher target, 2 degrees C, which is where I think your question of irreversibility may turn in based on all the data. And we can expect severe non-linear compounding effects of the various unsustainable practices that we have embarked on.
Thank you, Mukundan. So Mukundan brought in some sort of at least 2 or 3 technical terms in terms of the greenhouse gases, and he related that to the global warming. There has to be some discussion on what these greenhouse gases are. There are some greenhouse gases which are naturally occurring in the atmosphere, and these are carbon dioxide, it's methane, it is nitrous oxide, it is ozone, and it is water vapor. Now it's naturally occurring. So why are we so concerned about these greenhouse gases which are being generated? Now what happens is there's a certain amount of greenhouse gases which are occurring, and which contributed to the equilibrium of the planet. And these greenhouse gases contribute to a certain amount of warmth. Now, if you look at what you read in the papers, you say greenhouse gases are bad. No, why should they be bad? So what has happened is there are 2 types of gas emissions. One is the naturally occurring CO2 and CH4 and nitrous oxide, and then those which are induced by human activities. Though that carbon dioxide and methane and nitrous oxide, which is generated by human activities, whether it be it an industry or whether it be generating energy, etc. Apart from these, there are some other substances which are also called, so sulfur hexafluoride, for instance, hydrofluorocarbons, perfluorocarbons, and there are some bromine-related substances. These are also greenhouse gases which contribute to the warming, increase of temperature. Now, why are they called greenhouse? The name green comes from the terminology of greenhouse. The greenhouse is used in agriculture. The first greenhouse really came about somewhere in 1681 both in Britain and Holland. When farmers, when they want to grow plants, when they want to grow, they require a lot of sunlight. And these are particularly cold countries where sunlight is not seen often throughout the year. So what they thought of, or not throughout the day, maybe, if you have in India, if you can get probably 10 hours of sunlight in a day, there you might get in Holland, you might get only about 4 hours. So what they did, they developed this called greenhouse, which had a glass shell. So the plants were inside the glass house, and when sunlight falls on the glass, the glass, mind you, is not a conductor, but the sunlight falls and the sun rays falls on the glass. It keeps it warm. The plants are kept warm, and then it doesn't reflect it back. So what happens is the rays of the sun are kept within the glass enclosure, and even during the night, when it is night and there's no sunlight, the plants feel the warmth. So the glass traps the heat radiation of the sun. Similarly, in the earth, when the sun's rays fall on the earth, these greenhouse gases trap the heat. So what happens is when sun's rays fall on the earth, a lot of the sun's rays, the heat is absorbed by the earth. It's absorbed by the ocean, it's absorbed by the land, and then the balance is reflected back into space. But the entire thing doesn't go back into space because these greenhouse gases, so-called CO2 and CH4 and N2O, they trap the heat and the earth becomes warmer. So they have the property of trapping the heat from the sun. And over the years, with so much of human activity, the trapping of heat inside the earth, has really gone to such an extent. And as Mukund rightly said, the temperature increase has been 1.5 degrees since the pre-industrial area of 1850. The greenhouse gases have a property similar to the greenhouse used for growing plants, and that's why the term greenhouse. So is it good and bad? It is both good and bad. So it is good because in natural equilibrium circumstances, a certain amount of warmth is created. But it's bad because if too much of heat gets trapped in the earth, the temperature increases. So that's the question about the greenhouse gases. So if the question is, can it be reversed? Yes, it can be reversed, provided we can we can expel, we can probably grow some trees to compensate for the greenhouse gases, or we can capture the greenhouse gases and put them elsewhere. I think Hiran will talk a little more about this. So it is a reversible process, but if the things go on unabated like this, what's happening now, reversibility might be in question. And I think Mukundan talked about this term called net zero. So what does net zero mean? That each country or each organization commits itself to saying that the carbon emissions that we will generate will be net zero. Today, if every organization is generating carbon in a positive, in a positive quantity, we want to go to a situation where every organization says, or every country says, that we are net zero in terms of carbon emissions. So there's another term called carbon negative. If we go to carbon negative, if we grow more trees and then more afforestation, you can probably bring down, the carbon can be turned negative, and maybe the reversibility process can start. So those are the importance of those two terms, carbon net zero, which means the net emissions are zero, and net negative, the net emissions are negative. So this is in terms of the greenhouse gases. Now, Hiran, I would like to ask you, this talk about this global warming and temperature rise, is it a recent phenomenon, or is it been known for many decades and we have not been acting on it?
People have been talking about conservation at least since the Second World War. It's not something new. The research results from the early 70s clearly indicate the human activity and the adverse effects of that on the environment. There have been several agreements signed, multilateral international agreements around environmental sustainability, and University of Oregon maintains a database of all these agreements. But let's kind of try to get a flavor for it. If you look at climate change, back in the 70s, researchers were already talking about CFCs and their effect on the ozone layer. And the expeditions to the Antarctica found the ozone layer thinning around the South Pole, and they were raising alarms. So Montreal Protocol was signed in 1988, where 20 countries got together and said they will ban the use of CFCs and all these ozone depleting chemicals in the products that are sold in their countries. It took another several years, but by 2015, all the countries of the UN are now part of the Montreal Protocol to ban the CFCs and chemical VOCs and all these chemicals that are damaging the ozone. So we've averted that problem. But if you look at the Montreal Protocol itself, it is fairly limited. It was mainly focused on averting the ozone depletion and wasn't comprehensive in terms of looking at all the impacts of it. The IPCC was formed in 1988, around the same time, to become the focal point for the best scientific evidence there is for climate change, for the impact of human activity on the air and the climate of this globe. And UNFCCC was put together in 1994 as a body to manage the multilateral agreements around climate change. Because climate change, as we saw in the earlier charts where we looked at human activities impact, is one of the more alarming features of the damage we have done. Okay, Kyoto Protocol was signed at COP3, which is the one of meetings, the conference of parties that is organized by the UNFCCC, where developed nations agreed that GHG, the greenhouse gas emissions, need to be reduced. And in 2015 Paris Convention, all the countries agreed to the 1.5 degree goal, because if we go beyond the 2 degrees, the effects of the damage that we are doing to this earth is irreversible and non-linear. But if we keep it between 1.5 and preferably below 1.5, but definitely under 2 degrees, then we are still able to reverse the climate change impacts of human activity. COP26, which just ended in November last year, is where many countries made concrete pledges on reducing their greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, 50, or in the case of India, by 2070.
So the UN has taken a lot of steps in terms of over the last 2 decades, really to curb climate change and global warming. Now, in fact, right. I'm glad that Hiran mentioned about chlorofluorocarbons. In fact, 2 decades back, that was very much in the news, just as carbon emissions are now. And when I remember when we wanted to buy a refrigerator, they said buy refrigerators of the new versions, because some of the older ones emit CFCs. So we have come a long way since then, and I'm sure with all these steps, we need to take a lot more steps to really curb carbon emissions. Now, let me come to another question, which is bogging us. What are the other notable unsustainable practices? There are so many unsustainable practices which humans have indulged in. So, Mukundan and Suresh, what are the other unsustainable practices? Mukundan first.
Let's start with the beginning, right? What are the different types of pollutions that exist? Soil contamination is a big portion. We've talked about air, but let's talk about soil, right? Soil is the birthplace of your food. If that is contaminated, and which is what is happening, the topsoil erosion, all the issues that you're facing in the topsoil effects are getting contaminated with pollutants. So that's the soil side. Then we jump to the air pollution, which you've already spoken about, which involves all the greenhouse gas emissions, particulate matters, indiscriminate burning of waste. You've seen that heavily happening in northern parts of the country, clearing of virgin forest for agricultural or other uses. This is clearly causing a lot of air pollution. The CO2 is being sucked away by these forests, and we're losing the breathing of these forests by going that way. Suresh, you can continue.
Yeah, Mukund, I'll talk about three parts. One is the water pollution, and also about the habitation intrusion, which is happening, which is totally unsustainable, and the ecosystem loss. Now, coming back to water pollution, the total water pollution is basically blamed on human activity. We are dumping chemicals from the industry, from the agriculture, from the livestock farming. We are dumping all the untreated sewage into the water bodies. And the marine traffic, what is being done is resulting in oil spillage and cargo spillages when these activities are done. The main water pollutants include bacteria, viruses, parasites, fertilizers, pesticides, pharma products, and even radioactive substances. The other damage, what is happening is the global warming is leading the water bodies to warm up, and the dissolved oxygen levels in these water bodies are getting lesser, affecting the aquatic life and affecting the biodiversity. This water pollution is a very serious thing. It contaminates, it is affecting our biodiversity, it is contaminating our food chain. Availability of potable water is reducing day by day, and the diseases caused by this polluted water is very bad, and the infant mortality is going high. It is estimated that half the world's inhabitants in 2025 would be living in water scarce areas in the world. So this is something we need to stop, this water pollution, for a better tomorrow. Now, coming back to habitat intrusion. Habitat intrusion happens whenever we construct any kind of concrete structure or any kind of man-made structure through a natural habitat. Either it is forest or water bodies or anything. It upsets the complete natural habitat there. The migratory paths of the animals is obstructed. Most of the time, these animals, they come into interaction with the humans and they lose their life. Any concrete structure which is built contributes to the increase in average temperature in that location. Not only that, it affects the gradation of that location and the waterlogging happens. All the waste which is generated is generally put into landfills, and that generates methane, which is one of the dangerous GHG gas emissions. Ecosystem loss. Our human activity has altered 75% of the Earth's surface, squeezing the wildlife and nature into an ever smaller corner of the planet. So this ecosystem loss is, you can see it from the corals, the death of the corals, the forest, losing of forest habitat, and indirectly all the species which are dependent on that. Around 1 million animals and plant species are threatened with extinction, many of within the decades, according to the 2019 Global Assessment Report on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Service. Yeah, Mukund, if you'd like to continue.
No, I think one of the ignored areas is noise pollution, and it's especially true in Southeast Asia and India. Indiscriminate honking on the traffic road, heavily trafficked road. You got machinery very close to habitat areas. These leads to stresses in humans and animals. It cannot be, the health issues cannot be ignored for these. One of the key issues, for example, not just audible range, but ultrasound, higher frequency range. Your ultrasonic range, you are able to affect bird populations within a region because of the noise pollution, right? So the other one is well known. We know it. We do it everywhere. Plastic pollution. One-time use plastic being thrown into the landfills, oceans. Worst thing is the microplastics that are used everywhere. It's become a cosmetic thingy. It's used in every known use case for human consumption. But then the waste goes into, as part of the wastewater, into the ocean. The microplastics are deadly to the fishes there, right? and this is a well-known problem as well, radioactive contamination, near some of these nuclear power plants, etc. The other one that's ignored is the light pollution. Nighttime, some of these animals living nearby are nocturnal, and you're disturbing their entire life cycle with this light pollution. And it's not something that can be easily ignored. The other thing that I would like to mention is the thermal pollution, especially industrial waste. You have huge amount of hot water being dumped into the nearby water bodies. What this does to the biodiversity is a huge crime that's going on. If these animals had mouths to speak, there will be huge lawsuits, but they just don't. They're the ones suffering. Look at all the genetic engineering, the native species of seeds disappearing. Yes, there is a food shortage in the world. You've got to come up with non-natural ways of feeding people in terms of the type of food, but then there's a limit to it, and that's leading to a lot of biodiversity issues in terms of crop rotation issues, commercial agriculture. You've got grains, vegetables of very low commercial value. They're all disappearing, right? And huge issues with animal husbandry. Native cow species are disappearing, and there's a big documentary on Netflix called I think it's called something fishy. It's about the overfishing leading to damage of the coral reefs.
Yes. So Mukundan and Suresh brought out different types of pollution in terms of light pollution, noise pollution, air pollution, plastics pollution, radioactive pollution. And the impact that the human activities have had on migratory birds and animals and loss of biodiversity. The one thing which is also probably important to mention is the impact on the poorer sections of society. In a poorer section of society are always impacted more. You might think that, and it is all done by the developed nations, all the industrial waste, etc. But the poorer sections of the society, whether in their own country or in other countries, are probably impacted more. That's a subject of a very detailed discussion we will have in one of the other episodes. But let me come to the next question. Who are the main culprits, really, in terms of who adversely impact climate change and sustainability?
Yeah, I think huge area is, of course, urbanization, right? Concentration of activities in one city. I live in a city in Bangalore, right, where you can see extensive urbanization, vertical growth of the place. And, Bangalore is one of the more unsustainable cities in the world. There are many, of course, leading into that area, but it's unsustainable because of, traffic congestion, so many, pollution. You can look at many areas because of it's the urbanization is one of the key root causes.
Yeah, I would like to talk about deforestation. Deforestation, if you see, today 31% of the Earth's surface is covered by forest. Well, 20 million acres of forest were lost between 1990 and 2020. It is like almost 2,400 trees are being cut almost every minute. Forests actually help us stabilize the climate. They play a very important role in regulating the ecosystems, protecting the biodiversity, and play an integral part in the carbon cycle, supporting our livelihoods, and also help drive sustainable growth. Now, deforestation, the human activity, what we do for deforestation is basically for building factories, businesses, and home, and also for having farmland or for creating pastures for livestock. And naturally, the wildfires which happen in the forest, they themselves contribute to deforestation. Going forward, if we see the biodiversity affected because of deforestation is quite huge. Almost 137 different species are kind of losing on a single day basis. And on a yearly basis, almost 50,000 species are losing their life. The global warming effect because of deforestation is also there. Any green cover reduces the reflection of sun rays into the atmosphere. And open ground definitely reflects more, which adds to the global warming part of it. At this rate of deforestation, in 77 years, we may not have the rainforest at all. A single tree actually absorbs 48 pounds or 22 kilos of carbon dioxide each year, making it the most effective carbon filtration system on Earth. We need trees to clean our air. So it is our responsibility that we should plant as much trees as possible and try to reverse this deforestation. Now, the other factor which I feel is one of the lack of enforcement of environmental regulations in developing economies. Now, developing economies have a different challenge. The key challenges are instability, implementation issues, and governance. In instability, they have conflict with neighboring nations. They have financial instability, which leads to non-availability of resources like fuel and oil. So the focus shifts into these areas more, and the enforcement of environmental programs takes a backseat. And in implementation also, most of the time they try to import the solutions what has been done in other part of the planet, but it is but that doesn't give the desired results. So they need to have programs which fits the local context, and then the implementation can be done on it. The most important problem what the developing economies face is governance. A strong political will to transform development programs into sustainable long-term practices is required. But most of the cases, corrupt practices which are prevalent in the governments and not having absolute majority, it leads to dilution of this development programs.
Thank you, Suresh. Hiran, would you like to add any other thought to this, the culprits in terms of sustainability?
Okay, if you look at globalization, it has added a lot of benefits to the developing and underdeveloped economies. It's also helped the consumers in the developed economies in terms of cheaper goods and services and wider range of products. But unfortunately, so economically, globalization has had a lot of advantages. But from a sustainable environmental sustainability perspective, this not always been a great success, because we are now transporting a lot of things from one end of the world to the other end of the world, and contributing to global emissions. We are over extracting things from certain parts of the world, so damaging the environment in these mostly developing economies. Not only that, as part of the globalization, we've also started shipping waste from developed countries to developing countries, where the environmental laws may be lax or maybe not implemented as strictly. For example, Turkey, Malaysia, Vietnam, these are the largest importers of plastic waste. And developed countries send almost 23% of their electronic waste to developing countries for processing every year. Okay, so if the environmental laws are lax in these developing countries, then we are contributing to an unsustainable world. Apart from this, there are temporal shocks like the COVID pandemic that we are just coming out of. Although it increased the general awareness about sustainability for most of us, because we saw the impact of our unsustainable lifestyles and how it caused these diseases. And most people were not traveling. We were all locked in our houses. So from that perspective, it was good for the environment. But on the negative side, a lot of plastic waste was produced by the healthcare centers who were treating these patients. Masks, all these disposable masks became waste that needed to be treated but was not treated properly. PPE material, these all caused environmental problems. In addition, we were using, at the beginning of the pandemic, we had to we were advised to wash our hands as often as possible, which meant that we dumped a lot of detergents and contaminants into the water stream. Not only that, people were afraid to drink water from any source, so bottled water consumption increased, so adding to, again, single-use plastic waste created.
Yeah, so in fact, Hiran has been emphasizing about the globalization. In fact, one of the outcomes of globalization, or proponents of globalization, say that the world will become more developed. When India integrated with the world, all the proponents said India will develop. But what has happened is the aspirations have gone up. Everyone wants to ape the neighbor, ape the richer nations. And the lifestyle and technologies have also been there to support them. So with the result, the demand for all substances, not only food is okay, fine, but demand for steel, for cement, for chemicals, and for everything has gone up to the sky high. And which means there's more production, more consumption. More consumption probably increases the GDP, but it also produces industrial waste, as Hiran very rightly said. So the outcome of globalization and the aspirations to become developed is been seen in all the industrial sectors, be it power or steel or cement or chemicals. Now that's a real problem, and we are really, the world is going to grapple with this problem. So, having discussed a lot in our opening episode on the various terms and what are the causes and the major culprits, what can we do to address the problem? We have had some survey, there's some results, but there's something that we should do or start doing from today. We may not be able to achieve anything in the short term, but at least start doing. So Suresh and Mukundan, can we say what we can do to address the problem? Can you throw some light?
Let me start with what has happened in terms of the renewable energy side. That is clearly an essential portion of things to ramp up, because we have dug coal from the ground, dug oil out of the ground, etc., and use that as the biggest energies. 25% of the pollution is from energy, right? Energy production. Use is another case. If we start going the sustainable way with the help of corporations, individuals, even your rooftop solar inside your home, whatever it is, see where we are now in the market. 3.7% of the world's energy needs are met by solar. That's a tiny bit. We have a long way to go on that. Similarly, wind is only 6.6%. Hydro has been the champion at 15.3%. So it's reached the tipping point. Now we need to find more hydro sources, right? The next case is Sankey diagram, what we call it. How is the energy being utilized? Take the country like US, the champion of all the new technology that's emerged out of it. Look at the amount of energy that gets wasted. The rejected energy is basically 65.4% of the entire production is getting to be rejected. Is that sustainable by any means? There is a lot that can be done on energy efficient devices. So many things that we can talk about. Maybe Suresh, you can continue on this.
Actually, as individuals, we can do a lot of changes. We can do a lot of things to contain the energy usage in our premises itself. One of the solutions what Mukund was talking about is having rooftop solar. That is something which, if we can do it, it will be good. Or if we are going to get from an utility service provider, we should try to see if he is generating those energy from renewable energies. So that way we are reducing the dependence on other sources of energy. When we buy appliances, home appliances, it is better we go for very energy efficient appliances. The star mark which is there, which definitely gives us the kind of a thing, how much energy it takes. Another important thing which we may not realize is wastage of water in the house. Now, this water, when it is coming to us, it has been treated, it has been pumped. So much of energy has been utilized in this for the water to come to our house. Now, if we waste this water, we are losing all that energy what has been pumped into this for the water to reach us. Another important thing is the food what we buy. We should try to eat the food what we buy. And if we are not able to do it, we should try to discard it as compost. Because if we just leave it like that and it goes into landfills, then it is going to generate CH4 gases, methane gases, which is more dangerous. So this is very important part as far as an individual, what we can control. The other part, what Mukund was talking about is like all the devices, all the electrical and electronic devices, we should try to keep it off when it is not in use. That is the best way we can conserve energy into the thing. Another thing is transportation. We use these vehicles to go around to meet our utilities and our work and other nature. If we can have a very fuel efficient vehicle, if we choose to have a very fuel efficient vehicle, that will be the best. Even the best could be if we can have a fully electric vehicle. But if we're not, at least we should have a fuel efficient vehicle. The best way to choose a living today's world, what COVID has taught us, is if we can live in a kind of a society or a kind of a second tier town where all the utilities are available very close by, where you can walk and go or cycle and go and do it. That's the best way you are consuming, because you are using less fuel, less energy and less pollution to the air. Our motto should be always to reduce, reuse and recycle. And one more thing, the last what I could say is if we are aware of it, the global warming, the climate change and other factors, it is our responsibility that we make others also aware of it. Let's start with our friends, start with our family and the society, and then try to bring up a change in the local community itself, and then try to see what best we can do.
Okay, so Suresh, you have given some thoughts for all of us. So suppose we say we abide by your suggestions and recommendations, and if we start living sustainably and achieve net zero emissions, is the world saved?
Sure. See, if you look at it, renewable energy, as we said, it's a start. It's a start. You're just slowing the amount of emissions because of ramping up of coal and other unsustainable type of sources. So, with having said that, right, if you're just focusing only on the energy, renewable energy, as I said, the other piece is the best amount of energy that you can say, that you can. Is the amount of energy that you don't use, basically energy efficiency, saving the energy that you consume, right? And that's a big portion. I already talked about the Sankey diagram, which I displayed earlier. The one aspect of the whole thing is of course how do you do that in a sustainable way, using processes like something called biomimicry. What is biomimicry? Right, we are mimicking the nature, right? It's a method of creating solutions to human challenges by emulating designs and ideas found in nature. It's already being used everywhere. We are learning. It's an evolving subject. We are doing a lot of things. But if you look at this chart on the left, you will see that at the outset, the ecology is the outbound circle, and inside that is human society, and within that is human economy. Are we living to those standards? The way the world is moving along, the occupants of the world are moving along, economy is basically overshadowing human society, and human society is overshadowing ecology. And that's the reason for all of these unsustainable practices.
Yeah, we talked earlier about CO2 abatement and the need for keeping our temperature below 1.5 degrees, or if we can't, at least below 2 degrees. Because beyond that, if we increase in temperature goes beyond that, then it is a non-linear system which is out of whack. If we stop all our unsustainable practices today, even if we do that, currently we are adding about 17 gigatons of carbon dioxide every year, and we have been doing that for many years now. So it's not enough to just say, okay, we will close this spigot and everything will kind of come back to normal, because we have to undo the damage that we have already done. And that's where we have to figure out a way to remove the carbon dioxide that's accumulated in our atmosphere using the several CO2 abatement strategies. Simplest being planting more trees, or making sure you don't cut any more trees, to more technological solutions around direct air capture, or capturing it at source, or converting the biomass into biochar and using it as fertilizer. All of these methods. We will get into more details of this in the future podcast, but CO2 abatement is a big piece of what we need to do, even if we start adapting sustainable practices from today. The other aspect is to learn from nature, as Max just talked about. See, nature has perfected many of these things around, like, for example, photosynthesis is a very effective way to capture dispersed form of energy and convert it into a form of food that we can all use, right? The Nami beetles in South Africa, they're very good at, their bodies have both hydrophilic surfaces to capture the water and hydrophobic surfaces to kind of collect that water and make it usable for the beetle. Similarly, we see how nature produces sweet coconut water from the salt waters of the ocean, right? And that's possible because of these proteins called aquaporins, protein channels called the aquaporins. The more we understand the nature and use these in the way we do things, we can become more energy efficient and more, more sustainable as a whole.
That's a good thought. Good thought to, in a way, end the discussion on taking help of nature, because I think nature is our biggest strength. So we have come to the fag end of this first episode of Green Chat. Our objective today was to set the ball rolling, lay out the fundas, give some clarity to some of the main terms which are talked about, and hope we have been able to connect the dots and get the big picture. The problem is humongous. And India is the third biggest emitter of emissions in the world. Per capita wise, of course, we are very low, but yet, because of our population, we are the third biggest emitter. So all of us have to gird our loins and do something. The subsequent sessions, we will start with the major contributors in episode 2, and then the individual sectors, the energy sector, the transportation sector, the core sectors of steel, iron, etc. in subsequent sessions. When we started off, I quoted Albert Einstein having said that it's those who look on and do nothing who are the chief culprits, and not those who do evil. I would like to extend or modify this quote of Einstein in the context of sustainability and the world that we are in today. And I say, the world will become unlivable for future generations, our children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, not because of the ongoing human activities that have destroyed the environment, but because of those who looked on and did nothing. And therefore, this warrants a pledge. So I think we must pledge, all of us must pledge to make a commitment to learn and spread the word about sustainability and sustainable practice to everyone. So I have got three parts of this pledge, and I hope my colleagues and the co-panelists will concur with me. I will just read out, and I would require their support in this. The first part of the pledge is, I pledge to identify every habit / personal practice in my day-to-day life that is unsustainable and change them for betterment.
I do.
I do.
I agree.
Thank you. I pledge to spread awareness on factors and practices that are unsustainable at the community, societal, and corporate level and help them to change practices through personal and collective communication.
I do.
Yes.
Thank
I
you.
agree.
I pledge to act or intervene wherever possible, individually or collectively, to curb unsustainable practices.
I do.
I do.
Yes.
Thank you. So the essence of these three pledges are really in the nature of self-regulation, awareness creation, and action. And that is what we as a societal impact action group want to be. Spreading in knowledge, in dissemination of knowledge is part of action, and doing action on the ground to ameliorate this situation is also action. Now, I hope this session has been useful. We would like your feedback to improve as we go along. And we will send out a small questionnaire. We want to know whether the content was useful or they delivered effectively, whether the speakers, there were some thought processes in this, what the speakers were saying, where there was some knowledge that you garnered. Was the podcast actionable? And would you recommend Green Chat to others in your community? This feedback will be very valuable for us to constantly keep improving. As I said, we are all learning this game, or all learning this whole the subject of sustainability, and we hope to improve and give you better episodes in the days to come. Also, on behalf of our team, Hiran Vedam, Mukundar Narasimhan, N. Suresh, and myself, Suresh Mani, au revoir to you at the end of the first episode. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.